Well, thank you. Today on my podcast, Don't Follow the Shepherd, I have Michael Zwick, who is an attorney. He's also uh, been hunting down heirs and beneficiaries. God, I shouldn't use the word hunt, but searching for heirs and beneficiaries um, who are due all kinds of resources, if you will. He's in Orlando. He's been in business now as an entrepreneur for about 20, almost 25 years. And I'm excited to have him. It's very interesting to have kind of the probate PI, as he's known, on the show because I research people in similar ways, but for different reasons, not to the extent he does. But I want you to kind of give people a bit of an introduction to how you got into this space, and a little bit about your company before we get into some more specific questions. So welcome.
Thank you, Joan. Great to be here. So if you want to kind of launch in a little bit. As you mentioned, I am an attorney. I don't practice law anymore, but I did. And 24 years ago, last week actually, we started, my two friends and I started a little side business. We each had our day jobs, my practicing law. The other two were doing other things. We started a little business, finding people who had money coming to them from government treasuries, mostly unclaimed property, but other government treasuries. We got a little company that was called Assets International, and over a little bit of time, it kind of grew, and we found that there was a real need for services in the world of probate, which is the area of law dealing with someone's affairs and assets after they've passed away. Mostly distributing their assets, their property in forms of inheritance to whoever's receiving them. Specifically, the work we're doing is in that area is finding missing heirs and beneficiaries, as well as doing asset searches for estates where someone dies and has taken the information about what they own to the grave with them.
Yeah, no, what's interesting is it's a bit nuanced because when I hear heir versus beneficiary, I lump them together because I don't know any better. So one is really proven by, well, probate, let's go back. Probate is something that's kind of proven by law. It's the distribution and management as the law intends. Correct? Is that the right language to
Well,
use?
probate, like I said, is basically just the process for winding up someone's affairs to settle whatever debts they might have and to distribute their assets to whoever is entitled to them. Who gets it is dependent on whether there's a will or not. And if you want, I can kind of dive into that a little bit. Um, if someone does not have a will, then every state has a law that dictates who gets how much or what percentage of the estates. So obviously, if there's a surviving spouse, a widow or widower, as well, children or grandchildren if the children have passed away previously, then they're first in line to inherit. And there's a whole formula. If there's no spouse, then there's no children, then the parents, then they go to the siblings. It lays it out all out who gets it. On the other end, though, if someone has a will, assuming the will has been properly signed and executed and follows all the procedures it has to follow, and it doesn't violate any other laws, then the will trumps that law that I mentioned and will be the law of that particular case. So if someone says, I want all of my assets to go to my local, library or my local school or my alma mater, that will be the law for that particular estate, for that particular person's money. And that overrides the state law that says who inherits.
Got it. Okay. And one thing that's interesting, you've helped people like in 13 countries or something, or more or less.
I think that I lost. It's more than that. It's a few dozen actually.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. But the open record in the United States makes things a lot more easier for you to follow up on. Um, you know, there's I was reading a couple articles where you're featured. One was a gentleman who had a long lost buddy in Berkeley, California, I believe, who and he didn't realize that his friend had left him any money. The gentleman had, the benefactor, if you will, had been disabled, and his friends had helped him out, and he had given money to some of his friends, but didn't tell, they were unaware of it. So that
Right.
was kind of interesting. Another was a woman in New Orleans, or a man had been married twice. The second wife wasn't aware that there was a daughter from the first marriage, or maybe he wasn't as familiar with her either, quite frankly. And then you tracked her down, and then you take a percentage, not from the trustee or the family necessarily, but from the person who's the recipient. God, I made that really complicated. Uh,
Right. No,
but
you got it. Yeah. So yeah, typically we our fee is a percentage of whatever the people who we find are receiving. So and to put it in simplistic terms, if there's an heir who's missing and is due a sizable inheritance, we will hopefully find that person and go to them and say, hey, we've located money for you or assets coming your way. In exchange for a percentage, we'll give you all the information and we'll do all the legwork so that you can get what is rightfully yours. We also will do due diligence reports where the executor or trustee just needs the information, but there's not really a lot of money on the table. So, for example, I mentioned before, someone leaves their assets to a nonprofit instead of to their relatives. Um, the relatives are still entitled to notice of the proceeding and know what's going on. So if maybe I can go into the difference between an heir and a beneficiary, if you'd like.
yeah,
Uh,
please.
so a beneficiary is someone who is benefiting, someone who is been given inheritance either through a will or if there's no will through the laws that I mentioned before. And someone can though be an heir and not be a beneficiary. So, for example, the example I used before of someone who dies without or left everything to charity, the closest living relatives are still the heirs. They are not entitled to a dime, assuming the will is valid, but they still are entitled to notice of the proceeding. And if they want to object to the will, they say like there's something wrong with it, or the person was coerced into it. They have the right to do that. So sometimes the executive might call, say, I'm handling this estate, and the heirs aren't getting anything, but I still need to write the notice. Can you please identify them? Sometimes they don't even know who the heirs are, and get their most current contact information so I can send them the notice, the proper papers, so that I am complying with the law. So we'll do that on an hourly basis.
Fascinating. I mean, my aunt is works, well, she did. She worked in estate planning as an attorney. And I kind of envision a lot of entanglements with family members in that space at time. But really what you're doing is very clean and simple. Like you're just following the will, and you're tracking people down. You're not necessarily negotiating anything, correct? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
so right, but sometimes though, we do get called to get a lot of cases where someone didn't have a will. We had a case that we just settled recently out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where a woman, both of her daughters died after she had been admitted to a nursing home, and the court appointed an attorney for her. She didn't have a will, and by that time she lacked the proper mental and physical ability to do a will, which meant her will was going to go intestate, which, her estate, sorry, was going to go intestate, which means the law where there's no will. And the problem is this court-appointed attorney had no idea who her heirs were. So he called us, said, can you find them? Or first, can you identify them and can you find them? So we did a whole genealogy report and found that there were five first cousins who were her heirs, and each one was getting $1 million. She was worth $5 million. So each heir was getting $1 million. And we were able to find them, but we had to establish, the family tree and show the whole thing so the court would be satisfied that we found the right people.
Wow. Something you said that was interesting. I was watching another podcast where you were featured you were the featured guest. Common names make things rather complicated. And, in my space, in what I do now, if someone has a common name, much harder to brand them. For example, I'm in the space of curating digital brands and reputations, etc. And some person has a photo that's attached to someone else with another common name. When you Google them, this profile of someone else comes up, but it's their name, or their YouTube account is attached to someone else. And so when even some public figures with rather common names often find themselves with digital data that is misrepresenting them. So, granted, not as much as at stake. I mean, potentially, I suppose, in some regards, it is. But it's fascinating to me how people track things down on the internet, whether they're using LexisNexis or other databases. To the audiences, that may not be the exciting part, but to me, it's very interesting and nuanced. So I can appreciate that aspect of it. Um, you know, the other thing is that it's very rewarding for you when you can, surprise someone with this kind of gift, if you will, especially when they didn't know it was coming, or maybe when they knew it was coming or should have been coming. I could see how
Sure.
it's very rewarding beyond what most people can imagine on the day job. So, can you speak
Yeah.
a little bit?
Sure. So, we will often send out whenever we finish a case, we'll send to our clients a form. We want to get feedback. We want to hear from them, what we did right, what we can do better. We would like to hear, if they have something good to say about one of our employees, we want to give that proper recognition. But also one of the things we ask is, so what are you going to do with the money? And for some people, it's just like, oh, I'm just going to put it, throw it into my IRA. But sometimes we've seen some real life-changing stories. We've had people who have ended their homelessness. We've had people who have used that money to start the business that they've always wanted to do. We had one guy who, this was a few years ago, he lived in Amsterdam. He was a sports massage. He was a massage therapist, and he lived in Amsterdam. And he told us he did two things. One was he used to run all around town with his bed, the massage bed, everything like that. He used to run around town to people's homes and whatever to give massage. He says, with the money, I was able to do two things. One, I was able to get my own office, so this way people can come to me. I can give more massages. I can be more efficient with my time. And the other was, I always dreamed of going to the Olympics. And he used that money some money to go to London. This was, I think, 2012, so it's a number of years ago. He used that money to go to London to see the Olympics. It was always his dream. And to read those things of people, doing things that are, whether it's, change your homelessness, or the, checking off that bucket list item, or buying a house, whatever, those are things we really remember and remind us, why we do what we do.
Yeah, one thing that's kind of interesting, and I don't know how this really falls into something you can kind of critique, if you will, or provide an opinion based on work experience. But as siblings, for example, or family members in general, have spread out more in a globalized society, if you will, with the wealth gap increasing significantly. I had read a while ago about the sibling wealth gap. And, it's fascinating because we live in a different time where people are distanced from relatives primarily because of status. There's an insecurity around status conferred by wealth. So, people are, uh, not only living apart, but because their lifestyles are so different, it reinforces some of these disparities. And where I'm going with this is that in your case, you know, maybe someone left more money to one offspring than another, and you help to fill that. You help to kind of, I don't want to say make them whole, but you help to kind of perhaps bring families back together. I don't know if you've encountered anything of that nature. Um,
Well, we definitely have had cases where we've connected people who have not had contact in years. We had a case where someone needed to find um, one of the missing heirs, or didn't know who the heirs were, and we found the person's first cousin. They were living actually only about 15 minutes from each other, and they were in their 70s at the time. And they wound up, I remember they came to my office, both the cousins and their wives, and they immediately connected and started making plans to reconnect and have a relationship after all those years, which was really cool to watch that. But sometimes we do see what our clients perceive to be unfair circumstances where someone's left more money than they should, what they feel more money than they should be, or they're not left enough as much as they think they should get. Um, as I try to tell them that, frankly, that's not our job. That's not my job. I don't have to say over who gets how much. My job is really to find the people and get them what they are entitled to. We have seen some really unjust situations where someone dies and someone has died and then later their son died and meanwhile he had his his wife who never liked, she's getting the inheritance that her husband would have gotten. So it can get kind of messy sometimes. And as I tell people, like, listen, who gets how much is not in our control. You can take that up with court. That's we don't have any say over that.
well, yeah, I mean, and understood, but I think it is interesting that these inequities aside, and whether or not you succeed or not, there's an element of there's a collateral benefit. There's a benefit of you bringing people together, sometimes without sometimes the success, right? Does that, or would you not say that's a scenario?
It definitely, like I said, there are those situations where we are able to bring people together, and putting aside the financial injection that they're getting, it's the reconnecting with their family, which unfortunately that happening more, more and more is of people who are more mobile. They're moving different places. And even with all of the technology we have of making it so simple and easy to keep in touch with each other, how people just become estranged, and sometimes not because there was any sort of fight or any sort of breaking point. They just drift away. It's kind of sad to see, and we're always happy where we're able to rectify that situation.
Um, there probably unusual circumstances where people, well, let me ask you, how do most people find you, or how do you find projects? I kind of know the answer to that, but I want you to maybe elaborate a bit for audiences.
So we get a lot of referrals from just people who know who I am, word of mouth. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I have, I don't know, probably 14,000 followers on LinkedIn, and I get referrals from there, people who see my posts and or have had conversations with, and they reach out to me when they need my services. I'm A lot of attorneys know who I am because I am active, just through talking to people. I'm a member of some listservs, which if people are looking for to network, is find listservs or email lists that are relevant to their industry. So I'm on some listservs for attorneys that deal with probate, and every so often I will chime in, whether it's someone's looking for a referral to a good attorney somewhere, or they have a question about unclaimed property, which is another area of work that we do. So my name is out there. A lot of attorneys, some areas know who I am and know I'm the guy to call when they need my services. Sometimes being on a podcast, people will reach out to me because they heard my name. So fortunately, like I said, we've been in business now for 24 years, and I like to think that most people I've come to know a lot of people, and I like to think that most of them think highly of me.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I've heard you allude to is um, the role of the entrepreneur, the experience of the entrepreneur, and I think you're a model entrepreneur in how resourceful you are using LinkedIn, um, because you're certainly in a niche, and you know, you have to be creative to get your name out there. Now, granted, word of mouth is serving you these days, but you're still constantly posting. Another podcast host said that they see you active all the time. You do creative things. One thing I heard them mention that you use a movie theme to kind of uh, keep keep things fresh, but also engaging in ways that appeal to different audiences. And to me, that's very creative and interesting and entrepreneurial in spirit, um, because yes, your business is unique, but what you do have in common with other entrepreneurs is that you constantly got to find ways to engage audiences. And it's not probably the first thing that comes to mind when someone thinks of what you're doing. The various ways that you market yourself, um, are very important and relevant to audiences. Um, and the other thing too is you have a strong presence on LinkedIn. Now, do you use other social media outlets, or do you find that LinkedIn really serves you the most?
LinkedIn definitely serves me the most. I mean, I'm on Facebook. Most of my Facebook posts have nothing to do with my work, but I am active in some Facebook groups where that deal again with probate and trusts and stuff like that. So I'm active in there, but my kind of public reaching posts on Facebook really are not much to do with what I do. Um, LinkedIn is where I am because even though I'm not your typical uh, LinkedIn person in terms of I like to think keep things light and reflect my personality. It's still a good business networking group. So I look at LinkedIn as being just a nonstop global virtual networking event. And so I try to be active, try to like to keep things fresh and fun and educational, so people, like I said, know who I am. So, like you said, like the Mondays, on Mondays I take a movie and I try to tie it into something to do with probates. And I try to do movies that people, resonate with people. So I try to do, movies that are in the wheelhouse of those who are on LinkedIn. So we're usually typically movies from say mid 80s to 2000, which is kind of my heyday of movie watching.
Right.
So, but every so often I'll find a movie that is much older or much newer, and just like I said, just trying to have fun.
The other thing I think that people would be surprised, I mean, you have a pretty big staff, you have a pretty big team. I mean, I think maybe people might think, well, one or two people, but you have a pretty good size team behind you. Can you talk about some of the different roles that you have people in?
Sure. So yeah, we're about 15 people, and we have three primary roles other than really me, who's more focused on business development, and my partner, who's the COO. But everybody else kind of falls into one of three categories. They're either research, which is, finding people, finding who the heirs are or tracking them down or whatever. The salespeople, who are the ones who are reaching out to the heirs to say, hey, we found this money for you. We'd like to retain us. And then there's the claims part, which is we have a team of attorneys and their assistants. The attorney, you don't have to be an attorney to do what we do, but it helps because a lot of legal issues do come up, and we're playing in that legal world of probate. So it definitely helps to have attorneys. So we have a really good team in that regard as well. So really, it kind of everyone really pretty much falls into one of those three silos.
Wow, fascinating. I think speaking of movies, I think there's a movie there. Um, it just has to have the right angle, but there may be elements of it that are more or less dramatic or can be dramatized, if you will. But I think there's such a feel-good story behind this, behind what you do as a team.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've thought over the years of writing a sort of John Grisham type novel, but with the protagonist being a private investigator who finds missing heirs. I just it's and I tend to like those type of books anyways. John Grisham or the David Baldacci, type of, or James Patterson type of books. I like those books. I just it what I definitely think a book is in my future at some point. I just have to make it happen.
How about like your legal background, your legal credentials to me seem vital, but you might say that not necessarily so. I mean, I can't imagine. I think one of the most important things is to be able to communicate with other attorneys, um, and share that lexicon. Or is that not, or are there elements that I'm missing of where the bridging is important?
So it definitely helps to have a law license. First of all, it gives me credibility, added credibility, not just with attorneys, but also just with the general public of, I think, correct or not, I think people tend to hold all the jokes aside, people tend, I think, to have a more positive impression or figure in their head of an attorney versus a private investigator. Private investigator, think of like the guy who's sitting outside, doing a stakeout at 2 a.m., eating fast food, and whereas an attorney, think of like who's wearing a nice suit, he's going to court. So I think there's that. But also there's just the knowledge of the law, being able to know how to, read a statute or read a case. Because, sometimes it happens where we'll run into an issue and we'll go and we'll have to look up, oh, wait a minute, what does the law say about this issue in terms of who has priority, or is this will valid or something like that. So knowing how to look up and read statutes or court opinions definitely helps.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think of you as a treasure hunter. I don't know if people use that expression, but I could envision the team over a period of months or even years, a story like what's the length of a longer case?
We've had cases that have gone on for 10 years. Sometimes like finding the errors might not take so long, but then there's the whole process of the probate process. People sometimes think that we have the money sitting in our bank account, and as soon as they sign a contract with us, we'll write them a check.
Right.
First thing we have to do is we actually have to document that we have the right person. Going back to what you said before about people with the same name, something we have to, if we find a John Smith, for example, actually we once had a case that had someone named William Smith, very common name. So it was very understandable that the courts and the executor wanted proof that our William Smith was the William Smith who was entitled to the inheritance. So sometimes that could take a while because we have to document, we have to get the proper papers that connect the dots and show that we have the right person. But sometimes, excuse me, even after we've found that person, it might take a while to wrap up the estates. And sometimes there are wills or trusts that will say they don't want anybody getting paid right away. We had a case that started in 2009, and it said that the beneficiaries, one of whom was missing, that we found, and we actually found them within literally a day of being asked to find them. The payout was over 15 years. So we signed him in 2009. He didn't get paid. He didn't get paid. And we didn't get paid our fee, or most of our fee, until 2023. No, like we knew the money was coming. He knew the money was coming. It was every 6 months that the trustee would send him a check, and it was easy. It was like clockwork every 6 months. But that's just that. Again, things are out of our control. We don't have a control over how soon the money gets paid. It's to our advantage for it to get paid as soon as possible. Sometimes we have clients who get upset at us. They think that we're not doing our job because the money's not coming in. And usually what I'll do is I explain to them, you do realize that we don't get paid until you get paid, right? And they said, yes. And I said, so isn't it in our best interest to get you paid quickly so we can get paid quickly? And they say, yeah. And that usually ends the complaints. And they realize we're on the same side. We have zero incentive to slow walk a case.
Well, it's funny. I'm curious about your perspective on this. From an eponymous standpoint, using kind of the namesake, like unless you're a criminal, I don't understand why people would um, go to any length to shorten their name or make themselves more obscure. For example, we both share the same faith, and I always wonder, well, I don't know of another Jordan Shaw out there, but the time could come. So I use my middle name all the time on things just because I want that eponymous association to be able for people to be able to identify me by my middle name.
Right.
I'm
So
probably go ahead, go ahead.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I was practicing law, that I had to use my middle initial because you would think the name Michael Zwick is not that common.
Right.
Well, when I became a lawyer in Michigan back in the mid 90s, Michigan is where I lived and built my practice and my business. There was another Michael Zwick who was practicing law. No, I'm Jewish, he's Catholic, so we're not even of the same faith. And actually, our name was originally CVICK, not ZWICK. My grandfather, when he immigrated from Lithuania to Montreal in the 30s, changed it. But anyways, the reason I had to start using my middle initial was not only was there another attorney named Michael Zwick, but that Michael Zwick got into a little trouble with the law when he picked up some underage prostitutes and was convicted of some crimes. Was on the had to be on a sex offender registry, lost his bar license. And it was especially I was in Detroit, he was in Grand Rapids, so there's about 2 hours apart from each other. Um, but occasionally my work would take me out to that area of the states, and I would always make a point to say Michael J. Zwick, not Michael E. Zwick, because there were people who, when they'd hear just my first last name, they think like, wait a minute, didn't you get into trouble? And I said, no, 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 it wasn't me. So I did feel the need to specify my give my middle initial. But there are people who change their names for a variety of reasons, not because they're hiding anything. Some people, especially, people who immigrated here in the from Europe who had quote very quote ethnic names, especially like Jewish names, would want to assimilate, so they'd make it easier. So my brother-in-law's great grandfather's last name was Saperstein, and his grandfather, changed his name to Stone. He just figured it would, it was easier to remember. It fit better into American society back in the whatever mid 1900s. So people did it for non for good reason, not to hide for anything.
Right. But you point out something too that reminded me, these genealogy, the popularity of genealogy is growing. But I remember that, I too have family members who changed their name from, for example, Karnofsky was a family name.
Mhm.
But one changed their name to James Karen, who became a famous character actor, was in 100 films. But the other changed her name to something kind of similar, but it was modified. If we were to track down monies, it would be tough because we don't even know who, we're still not always sure who's really related. So,
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
going back to like our documenting, sometimes if someone has changed a name and we have to provide the document that show the legal name. Usually the name change most times is someone who gets married. A woman gets married and changes her last name. So we might have to show, if for example, money is left for Karen Smith and we find Karen Brown, we might have to find, the birth certificate for Karen Smith and then the marriage certificate by which she changed her name to Karen Brown, so we can show that Karen Brown is the Karen Smith they're looking for.
Wow. Fascinating. Well, thank you so much. I would definitely want to have you back because there's so many different topics
Oh,
in the
love to.
periphery. I because one thing I want to talk about in a future time is some of the digital records and how some of those things have changed over time. Uh,
Mhm.
but if people want to reach out to you on LinkedIn, your website, Assets International, maybe share some of the links or contact information.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Zwick, I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn because I think I was the first Michael Zwick. So I think I'm linkedin.com/Michael Zwick.
Okay.
Uh, assetsinternational.com is our website. Those are really the two easiest ways to get in touch with me.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you so much. I hope the weather's decent down there in Orlando. Are you in
Oh, it's
Orlando right now?
beautiful. It's
Nice.
beautiful right now. It's 80s during the day, cools off at night. It's perfect.
Well, thank you so much. Have a good week,
Okay,
and I'll catch up with you soon. Thank you
great. Thank
so much.
you.
Okay, take care. Okay.